this time since I failed to record the last time. My apologies to both of you. And again, thank you guys for making it. Last time we had myself, Sandra Berger, Diana Corbin, who's going to try to join us by phone, as well as Jill online. So
I'm here.
Oh, you're here too?
Diana's here.
Oh, Diana. Okay, perfect. There you are. You're not showing
I'm just
up.
on the phone.
Wonderful.
It's not showing up as on the attendee list, but good. That's
Well,
good.
good to know.
Yeah.
Thank you, Diana. All right, so we are part of the non-therapeutic drugs, vaping, that whole conversation that's going on right now. All right, why aren't you wanting to click ahead? So as you can see, Diana, Heather, Jan, Jeanette, Jill, Renee, you're here. Sandra Berger couldn't make it tonight. She was here last time. And then Melissa, I hadn't heard back from yet either. Those are all that Patty has twisted our arm and begged and pleaded to be part of this. And of course, Linda is our mentor. Been there, heard the testimony last time that we tried to bring this forward. A little recap of what we talked about last time. Currently, we have the 99406 and the 99407 codes that relate specifically to tobacco counseling and cessation use. However, the vaping, which is such a hot topic and is at, really they consider, the Surgeon General considers epidemic proportions right now. Counseling or education does not fit within these codes because it is not tobacco. It's nicotine, but it's not tobacco. And so we're looking at proposing a code for that. And that was the discussion we had last week as well, as what do we do? How much do we do? Last year, as part of the DCC, we proposed removing tobacco from the 1320 code and changing it out to say related to non-therapeutic use of drugs by report and provided what you see in the blue is the testimony. However, you can see the rationale that it was denied, and that it would be disruptive to an already existing code that was well known. And so, again, Linda, you were there. You can probably speak to that conversation and a little more to it than what I have here.
Okay.
And please feel free to do so too. And what we're looking at is who can we align with to increase our chances of getting a code through? What organizations might be in? And Linda, I'll let you take it, kind of get your impressions on it if you don't mind.
Oh, sure. I'd be happy to. So when we brought up the submission last year to basically alter a well understood code, they reacted very much to any changes to the existing code that was all about tobacco. They get good metrics from that. They get appropriate use of the code right now, so they didn't want to make any changes to that. But on the flip side, they were the committee itself, the CMC, Code Maintenance Committee, was very interested in having a code about vaping, but then they said, well, what about all the other substances, not just vaping? What about things like marijuana that have an impact on the oral cavity, and our counseling having to do with that? What about methamphetamines? And then the list started growing, and then it got cumbersome, and they recognized there was no way to resolve those questions, answer those questions. I think they were firm that they did not want to do anything with the D1320, which is the Tobacco Counseling for the Control and Prevention of Oral Disease. But the impression that we all got was that they were very interested in seeing vaping, seeing something on vaping, but then others on the committee said, well, what about this? And then what about that? So I came away with just a general sense that we might need, well, there's a couple of ways to tackle it. You can try to lump all of those other drugs and substances and products into one and have it be, and they're going to be very different, and our approach as providers is going to be very different in how we talk to our patients about it, but they want to have a code. One of the members of the CMC is my great-grandchildren just got home from an outing, so they're all kind of like in the background. I don't know if you can hear them, but anyway, I have great-grandchildren, and they're being noisy now. Anyway, one of the members of the CMC is a Sharon Perlman, and if you're looking at a computer screen, you see her name up there. She is the representative from the AAPHD, American Academy of Public Health Dentistry, who serves on that committee. And she was the one who said, I need this code right now. She really wanted to try to push something through that day. But the others were saying, it's not ready. It's just not ready. It's too big an issue. It's too important to try to cram something in, and we know, they seem to have reached a consensus fairly quickly. They did not want to change the tobacco counseling one. So that means they need a new code, a brand new code that deals with these other, and they said, should we call it a product? Should we call it a drug? Should we call it substances? We get the non-therapeutic use of drugs. They liked that. But now we kind of have to start talking about all of the things. And here's what I would recommend that we do as a work group. Think about every single one of the things that we're aware of that could use a code, because we're, as oral health care providers, we're looking in the mouth, we're seeing evidence of, or we may discover it on our during our assessments, that they're using something that could have both oral effects and systemic effects, and we're the one who gets to counsel them about that. Anyway, our task is going to be, should we make a new code for all of those kind of lumped together, or should we make one separate code for each one of them? And I'm going to be honest, I think Sharon Perlman, Dr. Perlman, she's going to focus on vaping, I think, and perhaps not talk about the others at all. I don't think it would hurt us to write a very, and we could justify it, I know we can justify it, a separate code for each of the problematic non-therapeutic drugs or substances. I don't know. That's kind of the way I look at it, and let them shoot it down, which they may do. But the vaping one, I know that Dr. Perlman is very interested in that one, and I had the impression that she needs data. She wants that code, something along those lines, in order to both encourage practitioners to do that kind of counseling and become more aware themselves. And then also she needs the data that's going to come from it. But it was very exciting in a nerdy kind of a way, because I thought, all right, she is definitely a supporter of what we're trying to do. She and we are thinking the same way. So I contacted her. I just sent her a quick email, and I reached out to her on LinkedIn, and she did get back to me, and she said, I'm working on something. She said something like, I'll let you know what I have when I have something to share. So that didn't tell me much, except that I think she'd be happy if we helped her with it. But she wasn't acting like, from that kind of a response, she wasn't acting like she felt like she needed us necessarily, because she's working on something herself.
So was that since you and I had talked last week, Linda? That response, or was that previous?
That was previous.
Okay, that's what I thought.
She did get back.
So I have reached out to Dr. Perlman as well. With the holiday weekend and everything, I didn't do it until this morning. I have yet to hear back from her, hoping that we can maybe at least form some sort of I don't know if alliance is the right word, but if we can streamline together, and two is always better than one.
Right, and I think she's probably less likely to share with us what she's doing, but that's okay. I think I I hadn't had enough of a conversation with her in writing, and I've never spoken to her on the phone, but I did hear her speak at that meeting, and I could tell she was a bit frustrated at being told no, this one isn't ready for, we agree that something needs to be done, but we're not going to wordsmith this thing today at the meeting. Go back to your corners and work on it and bring it back to us next year. That was the comment. And it was like, okay, fine. And she's ready to work on it. So, I mean, I guess I would, my recommendation to you all as a work group is to, well, first of all, what do you think about the idea of identifying several substances that are problematic and that create risk for oral health and total health? We see evidence of it, it's possible, or we might learn of it during an assessment on a dental hygiene patient. But then to have a separate code for each one versus having one code that covers all of those other things, including vaping, methamphetamine. I mean, I think that we should address opioid use and how to handle the drug, how to dispose of it. I think I don't know if we count that as a separate billable procedure. I don't know, that's not what the codes are about, but it is a procedure. It takes some time and it takes some knowledge to do that. I'd like to hear what your thoughts are. Do you want to try to just lump a whole bunch of things under one code, or would you rather see separate codes?
And what we talked about last time, Diana was on the call again then, and Jill and Sandra, who aren't with us either. We talked about definitely having a proposal for vaping. The thing was, do we do education or do we do cessation as part of it? Now, another thought is, do we use it as kind of mimic the tobacco codes that we have, where it's broken up into counseling greater than 3 minutes, less than 10, greater than 10 minutes. And then we talked about as well as about creating a separate code for substance use counseling. So maybe this is the people that are using the prescription medications, or as we prescribe them within the office, how many times you just get handed the prescription, even when we go or see within a dental office and nobody says a word about it other than here's your prescription, and great. That's a great way to track that metric as well, that we provided that education around it. Everything from use to side effects to disposal, that way. And then we can look at also the code for a non-medicinal, maybe street drug use. And so that's kind of where we left it at the last point. And I would love to hear everybody else's opinion on that. Or do we break it down further? Because, if we suspect somebody's using, or they confirm that they're using, say, meth or heroin or whatever it may be, I think we would almost muddy the waters if we broke it down too much versus having, I don't know if saying illegal or street drugs is the right term, but if we kind of lump those together.
Right. Another concept just to consider is that not all drug use, substance use is high risk or problematic.
Correct.
There's a line you cross with any of them where it's either recreational, functional, not abusive. I don't want to use the word normal, but it's not going to be a problem. But then there's a line where you cross, and I think that becomes part of our education. That okay, so thank you for sharing that information with me. I just want to share with you now. There's a line if you cross over it into this range, or these kinds of things start happening. Then you're in a category of higher risk to your health. And so that's a strategy that I think goes along with tobacco use. Just one one episode of smoking a cigarette, or once a year on your birthday, you smoke a cigarette. Okay, I'm not going to get all bent out of shape and try to get you to quit doing that as a healthcare provider. But when it crosses over into more habitual and problematic, then okay. So
an example of this is I had a patient last week, I believe it was, maybe the week before. Saw him for a limited exam in the morning, had to bring him back in the afternoon to do treatment, and he went home and he was terrified of the dentist. So he went home and had quite a few drinks before he showed up, and he walked in and said, "Yeah, I did." He goes, "I had to calm my nerves," and he smelled of it. And so, I mean, again, that can include alcohol. It can include so many things in that substance use. And do we look at the terminology use versus abuse, which was another subject we kind of touched on last week?
Mm-hmm. And I think
how do we define that?
Right. Currently, the term in use in public health circles is high risk. So there's high risk use, risk for adverse outcomes, and then there's low risk, like like that one cigarette you have on your birthday when you go out with your friends or whatever.
Absolutely.
That's pretty low risk. But higher risk to your overall health and well-being, and perhaps those around you, because of impairment, it's another issue. So I think rather than say abuse, because
high risk substance use.
Use, high risk use of substances and drugs, right? Or including when you're using, let's say, a prescription drug recreationally.
Exactly.
So, because that can happen too. So the substances, drugs, and products may be prescription, they may be non-prescription, they may be available over the counter, but many of them carry some risk when they're used in a certain fashion. And so that's what we want to educate our patients about. Yeah.
So Linda, what's your thought? Say the three I have up there. If we had one like the non-medicinal substance use or high risk use versus high risk substance use, how do we break those apart versus say prescription medication versus non-prescription, which would cover like your street drugs or whatever those may be, because they have very, very different effects.
And this is Renee. I just have a question. Is there a code for prescription medications? I mean, we spent hours counseling on dry mouth from prescription medications. Is there something for that?
I don't believe so. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I mean,
I don't recall ever seeing one.
So it's oral. Yeah, it's oral health, oral hygiene. That 1330 oral hygiene instructions.
Okay, so it's just that one is supposed to cover our half-hour discussion on all their medications they take for dry mouth.
Right.
When we're breaking down a code for all of these others,
right.
You know what I'm saying? It's like, okay, well, we should have a code for that. I mean, oral hygiene instruction to me is how to adequately improve your oral hygiene through brushing, interdental care, that type of thing, and not necessarily that whole dry mouth discussion, which I add into it, of course. But when we're looking at metrics as what we're measuring of our success rate on what we're talking about different things, I'm just thinking, is this any different than having for these other drugs?
So with that, maybe that could qualify as well as a high-risk substance use, because, we're not just talking abuse, but that could be the education part of the effects of the medications they take on a daily basis. Correct?
Right. Well, and then what about the ones that the oral surgeon prescribed opioids? So then again, instead of saying you say, okay, the oral surgeon prescribed you some opioids, want to talk about what that should look like from your end, and describe the line where you cross over from use that's functional and helpful, and then we're into a higher risk category.
Correct.
So I think we are onto a gap, a very big gap. I think Sharon Perlman recognized the gap. I'm not certain that vaping, it sounds like where we're going right now is towards a single code that covers all of these high risk, let's say substances, drugs, and products that carry risk, that come with risk when they're used by patients in a certain way. And I'll have to work on the way we word that. But then we can talk about methamphetamine, we can talk about heroin, we can talk about opioids, vaping.
Vaping,
What
I
else?
think, needs to be very separate, and we kind of discussed that last week. It needs to be its own beast because it is such a big thing out there and a different way of doing it. That was just kind of the thoughts of the people in attendance last week. It is its own thing, kind of like smoking is its own thing, tobacco use.
Okay.
And so that's kind of where we left it, Diana. Is that the impression you had as well?
And
Or if that, that was kind of again.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
okay, so
Sorry, I had myself muted and I had to get unmuted.
Yeah,
Yes,
great.
I agree. Yeah, I like the path.
Okay.
I mean, I just look at the percentages of people that are probably vaping compared to the people that have oral health conditions from prescription medications, not just the opioids, but the dry mouth and histamines and all these things that are causing such dry mouth. I see a lot of elderly people that
Oh, absolutely.
we're getting rampant decay on those people as well as the ones that are vaping, which tend to be a much younger population. And I just think of the numbers of people that are in each of those categories, and to say, well, vaping is really important, we should just categorize that one separately. I don't know. I don't know that there's much difference between the vaping, and maybe I'm wrong on this because I didn't go to your seminar. As far as I think it's an important issue, I obviously do agree with that, but I think all these others are important issues too. So say we create one for vaping and then we create a general one for everything else, or a separate one for opioids, so I'm just muddying the waters here probably, but I'm just thinking off the top of my head here.
That's the beauty of it, is we don't have to limit ourselves, because I wholeheartedly agree. I spend probably half of my patients a day, we're talking about the medications that they're on and the oral effects they have, and why when they were in there a year ago and didn't have any cavities and now they're a mouthful of root caries, what could be the difference? I agree. That's something that's probably very important and should be out there as well. But we don't have to limit. But on the other hand, the vaping is something that we've got very specific interest, it sounds like, as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is why we all come together with a meld of the minds and thoughts and opinions and what we want to see. But I agree that that's something that there is a definite gap in, Renee.
Yeah, and then it's like, how do we make this happen then? And I know, Linda, you said too, if we start sectioning off so many different things, it's like, oh my goodness, I got to add 10 codes now because I've talked about, different topics with so many different people. And,
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And to measure, getting our metrics in there, which is great and exciting. And then I'm an old hygienist, so I'm used to putting in those 4 codes that we've had for the last 30 years, So I'm really excited about adding these other codes for metrics, and then I sit back and look at my clock and think, wow, well, now I gotta, get all these in there. And so, I mean, a more general code might be more successful than putting out 4 different or 5 different codes related to substances.
Right.
And I think smoking was on the edge because of smoking is on the downslide, isn't it? And now vaping probably is on the increase, but I still don't know how many people, what's the population that's involved in that?
Huge. Oh goodness, I can't remember off the top of my head, but just in teens alone, I believe it increased about, I'm trying to say around 30% over the past year.
Wow.
In vaping alone. And these are a lot of these kids are kids that would never pick up a cigarette because the stigma, the stink, the stain, but the vaping is trending. I was having a conversation yesterday with my sister and my 17-year-old nephew, and they've been going at each other because she says it's bad, and he says, no, it's not. As long as you don't have nicotine, it's not bad at all.
It is.
It's the misinformation that is out there.
He doesn't know that there's nicotine in the vaping?
Well, he said as long as you don't buy the one with nicotine, which you can buy it without nicotine, that it's okay. Well, it's all the other chemicals as well, and being heated up and ingested, and inhaled. Excuse me.
Huh.
But that's the mentality of the teens, young 20s on it. And so we're really looking at the education part of this, and it's the Surgeon General has put out that it's in epidemic proportions. The city of San Francisco banned the sale of all vaping devices last week.
Wow.
Yeah, which is the first city in the U.S. to do it. So it's something that's definitely the hot ticket item right now of conversation. So there's a part of me that says we need to go on that momentum and get that, because I'm sure it's going to come forward.
Right. And as you do bring codes out with, like you say, specific things, then that should also stir the pot for some of these other things maybe next year.
And that's just it. We dip our toes into it and get, really focus on getting 1 or 2 or 3 wins, and then break it off to next year to see where else we can go with it. Might be the key.
Yeah,
Hi,
that's what I
this
was going to ask.
Oh,
hello?
Can we just do, like, I think there's a whole pile that we have to do, but can we just concentrate on one at a time, maybe? Or is there a deadline for all of them, or is there a rush, or?
Well, next meeting, the general, kind of the whole DCC meeting is next week on Sunday night. And so Patty's wanting everybody to come forward and say, okay, where's your thoughts? Where are you going with this? Well, and it was her impression as well from that there's a definite need for this code, and there was a definite interest from the committee in this code. And that's why we're really focused on that vaping code as well. But there's also so much, say, opioid use and along there as well. So we're looking at trying to, what can we narrow it down to, and kind of what ways? Did you have some input on it, Sandra?
Hi, sure.
Hi.
Well, so I am late. I don't want to lose the focus that vaping can be a very good smoking cessation tool. And while it might be abused and by teens, and that is definitely the trend, in England, if a person who smokes cigarettes isn't offered a vaping program to try to quit, it's considered, not best practices. So we can't, we don't want someone to start vaping that has never smoked before, and that's where the teens are going. We also don't want to lose sight of the fact that if you have a person who smokes and they start vaping,
we're looking at the lesser of the two evils.
Is that they're in a better spot by vaping than smoking.
And that's, before you joined in again tonight, we were talking about, do we do it as counseling or education versus necessarily cessation? And that kind of like we talked last week as well.
Okay.
And so that was kind of the first part of the conversation before you hopped on as well. And because I agree, for a lot of smokers, that definitely may be the better option. I know lots of smokers,
And I can just
too, so it's kind of hard to say, but we definitely want the education piece in there.
Exactly.
Can I share some information too?
Absolutely.
Just to Sandra's point, is that my husband has a vape shop, which I know, it's like the Antichrist, but he does. And he, hygienist husband has a vape shop. They should take my license away. So what a big part of his shop is all about. He doesn't sell jewels. He doesn't sell all that crap that the 7-Eleven sell. He's helped. He has a tobacco cessation using vape, and he does the nicotine. He can make if you smoke a cool cigarette, he can make it taste just like a cool cigarette. to sort of bring you down, and he has got people not smoking and not vaping. They completely quit everything. So, you know.
And that's
Yeah,
sorry.
I agree. I mean, I don't, you know, I guess I'm coming from somewhere else. I don't think it's the Antichrist. And
No, but Sandra, I tell people that my husband has a vape shop, and they look at me like I've got 5 heads,
I know,
and I'm like,
I know.
dealing drugs.
But like
So,
someone said,
you know,
you know, like someone said, you know, for teenagers that would never pick up a cigarette. I disagree. I think that that you'd be surprised if these kids, if they weren't vape, they might be smoking.
Well, and that's, again, you've got such a wide range, and it's such a vast country, and different areas are different. Looking at the studies that they've talked to, and I was the one who said that, Sandra, but looking at the studies that they've had and out there, they've polled a lot of these kids that are vaping and said, have you ever smoked or would you ever consider it? And their answer was no. And I don't know, I don't have the statistics off the top of my head, but it's with the research that I've read about it as well. But I'm not going to argue for smokers. It's probably the better choice. There's a lot less chemicals. But on the flip side, it hasn't been around long enough that we really know the long-term systemic effects of it. And so as more and more research comes out, we're also looking, and again, we're focusing on the education part. Like I said, my nephew thinks that it's completely harmless because there's no nicotine. And that's kind of the thoughts that I get from a lot of kids. And the majority, you know, a good part of them, you know, will buy them at convenience stores where they're not getting the education like from Diana's husband. They're getting, you know, just walk in, pick it up, let's go. So there's a definite broad spectrum of what people are doing out there that are selling, or people that are, how they're getting it. So that's kind of the, you know, devil's advocate of it. I do agree it's better, but again, we're at that point, we've got to decide of what we're going to have this code. What do we want to focus on? What would be the important part, the education, or is it important for cessation for some?
I would say education. I got to jump in here because no matter what you do, I think you need to educate about high risk use.
I agree.
All of that we're talking about have a risk, but there's a threshold where a lot of use is probably in the category of low risk, maybe recreational, occasional, whatever, or low risk would be using nicotine vaping in order to quit smoking. That would be a relatively low risk, but is there a high risk version of that same vaping device? I think there probably is. So we can become educated ourselves and then share that information with patients. Here's where it crosses over into a higher risk category, and you want to avoid that. So I like the idea of focusing on education. Perhaps there's 3 words: counseling, education, and advising. But education is a component of all 3 of those things. Sometimes the advice is to switch to something else, cut it out entirely. Perhaps even consult with a medical doctor, because we're dealing with an addiction, and a parent addiction, which is high. That's going to be in that high risk category. So, and yeah, but I think that's perfect. And I'm still grappling with the question of what to include. Should we have one for vaping, because there's a lot of support for it right now? Just in the 2019, there's at least one person on that CMC who recognizes that they want to have a code, and she really, really wants to have a code. So okay, let's help her get that done. But I think we should. This is just my opinion. Take it or leave it. We should have another code for other other things that aren't those vaping devices.
I agree.
And it could be an
I think
umbrella.
that's well said.
Covers high risk use of multiple other substances and products.
Hmm. And maybe it's just one other code to include that high risk, because again, that can encompass prescription medications. It can encompass alcohol addiction. It can encompass all kinds of things. So for the meeting next week, going forward, do we say, yes, we're gonna try to come forth with one for vaping, and we're gonna come forth with one for high risk substance use counseling? Is that kind of what I'm gathering? And correct me if I'm wrong. Sandra?
sounds
I
good.
think that's a good idea.
Okay. Oh,
Also, the thing about it is when kids start using anything, they get comfortable with that, and then they get more comfortable with maybe going up and using something different. So I think that somebody, I don't know who was saying it early in the meeting, but I think we have to meet our patients where they are. If they're vaping high intensity nicotine, then we try to just sort of develop a relationship. You know, how does it make you feel? You know, kind of tell me about that. And then, you know, if there's pieces of education in that, you know, our patients listen to us. We know that. So we have a relationship. So I think, you know, just meeting them where they're at and then kind of working through it with them is helpful. I had a patient tell me, it was a couple weeks ago, he was 13, and he said, "What do you think about vaping?" And I said, well, you know, there's a lot of information about it, and it's a lot of, you know, it's really something that a lot of kids do now. I said, "What do you think?" And he said, well, you know, so to make a long story short, he vapes, and he's also, he's bisexual. I mean, we went from vaping to bisexual to he didn't want to tell his parents. I'm like, oh my God. And so, you know, it was like, so this is what they tell us. They tell us everything we don't want to know because we don't want that information. So what do we do with that information? So it's important to sort of meet them where they're at, give them the education they need, and then, you know, they can do with what they want, but that's our job. And that's my feeling.
That's a great illustration of the role that a dental hygienist can play as a healthcare provider. It's opening up this young person. I'm assuming that they were young. Wanted somebody to talk to who was knowledgeable. Like, tell me, you know, like, am I crazy? Am I bad? Am I doing something really horrible? Am I going to hurt my health in some way? And you can be a wealth of knowledge for them, and then also help assistance in a healthy life. Yeah.
No, absolutely. I think this is just our way to track that. Because I've had those patients throughout the years as well that they tell you stuff that you're kind of exhausted at the end, going, wow, you know, I had no idea.
Right.
What do I do with this now? But on the other hand, they trusted you enough to talk to you about it. But this is our way to create that metric, to say, you know what, we talked about it, we discussed it, and to reference back to every time that, you know, we've talked about this before. We've, you know, obviously it's in your chart notes, but it's also there. And in my opinion, like I said, we've got the backing, we've got the support, we've got the momentum of people wanting to see one specific for vaping. So do we come forward and just mimic something very similar to the tobacco counseling codes?
All right, let me
read we had before.
Let me read 1320 to you in case you don't have it right in front of you. Tobacco counseling for the control and prevention of oral disease. Now that's very specific, and frankly, I don't know why we have to limit it to oral disease, but okay. Tobacco prevention and cessation services reduce patient risk of developing tobacco-related oral diseases and conditions and improves prognosis for certain dental therapies. So this is kind of saying to me, this particular code is saying we recognize that we have to stay in our lane and just talk about, you know, oral problems. And I'm thinking, well, maybe.
That seems outdated.
Yeah, it feels outdated to me. I don't know
because we know the whole body connection.
Well, of course, yeah. This seems to like deny that, sort of like, okay, we know that we can only talk to you about oral diseases, but okay. So if we were to do a vaping along the same lines, what would we do? Vaping counseling for the control. Vaping? Is that the correct term?
Or
Anyway,
e-cigarettes
e-cigarettes.
or
Okay,
electronic devices.
I like vaping because it implies that you're vaporizing something,
Yes.
and then inhaling it. Okay. Vaping counseling for the control and prevention of oral disease. Vaping prevention and cessation services. So now okay, we could talk about in the descriptor here.
Mm-hmm.
We could talk about high risk use, and I would like, well, I wish that it was that way with the tobacco too, but anyway. Prevention and cessation, I don't know if we want to go there necessarily. I don't think that we should make it look exactly like the tobacco one.
No, but I mean kind of on that's, along that same path a little bit. It might give us guidance to where to start.
Okay, so here's the next part of the sentence is reduce patients' risks of developing vaping-related oral diseases and conditions. Now, one of the things that we don't know, because it's too new, as you said, that the last part of this descriptor says, and improves prognosis for certain dental therapies. We know that people who smoke are going to have a poorer outcome following scaling and replaning, and surgical healing too. We don't know that about vaping.
No, but there are documented studies showing other systemic effects, but specifically orally, I haven't seen those very big studies,
Right.
but there's studies that show the systemic effects coming out.
Okay.
And maybe we can wind that into it as well.
Okay, so
There's a study on periodontal disease and vaping.
What's that?
Is there?
There is a study that vaping can affect periodontal disease. I'll try to find it.
It exacerbates it? Okay, well, so
Yes.
how about lung?
Yes, there's lots of that.
The consequences or adverse
Mm-hmm.
conditions of the lung. Okay, let's try to include that in the descriptor. Let's see what happens. It might get, if we shared this with Sharon Perlman, she may say, I don't know if we're ready to put that into the code manual, but I doubt that she'll disagree necessarily.
So Sandra, would you be willing to find that if you've seen it and share it?
Sure. I'm looking right now.
I know I've read a bunch of stuff.
Did I hear correctly that there's been a study with vaping and periodontal disease? What was that comment?
Yes, ma'am. Sandra's looking
It was
for
an
it.
article. It's not necessarily a study. It was June 10th on Perio Implant Advisory.
Oh, yes, I did read that.
Is vaping bad for your teeth? There's also one from Healthline. So,
And where is? I just would like to read that. Where did you? Does somebody? You take notes on this, or do we have like a meeting note thing somewhere?
I'm recording this as well, and then
Oh, great! So
we're gonna get that in the Dropbox. Or if Sandra, if you want to just email it to me, I can download it in the Dropbox if you want to link to it.
I can email it to
perfect.
to everybody to the.
Thank you.
I'll just put the links to it. And so if you had to, and I know this might not be applicable, but if you had to pick, like, are you for or against it? I am 100% for vaping. I feel like it definitely has a place in this world. And so I don't want to lose sight of that, but so when you read this article, though, it is a little bit skewed because I feel like these people are not for it. And of course, you don't want a skewed either for or against it in anything, but it's just something to think about.
But we're going to have to be able to provide the information in the testimony saying there is a need for this because of
Exactly.
potential effect.
Yep.
So we're not going in saying yay or nay. We're going in saying there's a need for this code for counseling because of the potential adverse effects, basically.
Right. But I just want you to realize that the top article that I'm sending, I do feel that the person that wrote it was writing it from a skewed point.
Well, it was all negative. There's no good. There's no
Yeah.
characteristic of it. And you're saying,
Right.
well, there's a safe use zone and then a high risk zone. You would agree with that statement?
There's, I'm not sure I could say safe, but there's a reason to use it. Yes. There's definitely, reasons to use it and a place in this world.
And I will say that there are people who my husband has worked with to quit smoking, and they are so thankful that they had this modality to use that to quit, smoking anything. So Sandra's point again.
Perfect.
But
Well,
it's hard to convince dental hygienists of things like that. I mean, that's a really big hill.
it is.
That's going to take some time. It's going to take some time for
Sometimes,
people
yes.
to be educated about it, but I think the dental community as a whole is about health and wellness and well-being, and we're about prevention. And so if we recognize that there are adverse effects of this new thing, when it's used in a certain way, excessively, again, as soon as you use a term like excessively, you have to define it, but and we have to be able to recognize it. And then I think at least Dr. Perlman and the rest of the CMC wants to see a code so that we can code it. We can advise our patients and submit a code.
Perfect. Well, so when Patty asks us next week, what am I understanding again is we're going to look at saying, yes, we're going to create a code for vaping education. And then we're looking at creating a code for high-risk substance use counseling. Is that, are we looking at just those two? Is that kind of the agreement? And it can change as we go along. We may come up with more that we say, you know what, let's add to this, or let's break this down, or combine this. Is that kind of the feeling of everybody that we still have here?
I think when we get to the part where we write our rationale, we can give quite a few examples of times where patients have really needed additional information, and we're the ones, somebody in that dental office is going to sit with them and spend some time helping them understand the risk of whatever it is they're doing, and how to avoid the nasty consequences. So, yeah, I think we can come up with some very interesting rationale and support it with good scientific evidence.
I think that's going to be the key behind it as well, that they're going to look for, is what evidence we can provide. Well, wonderful. So next Sunday night, we have our meeting with the whole committee. Do we want to look at it Monday night as well? Or do you want to take a week and not meet? What's the consensus? Or keep the momentum going?
Do one of you want to take a stab at writing a descriptor and nomenclature for those two conditions?
I can take one of the two. I would be more than happy to take the vaping and at least get kind of a baseline, what we're looking at. It would really help to have maybe some eyes looking for the scientific backing on that as well as we start to move forward. Um, what about on the other one for the substance use counseling? Is there any takers on that one? Somebody say yes.
I'm glad to help, but I was going to ask you, Jamie, if I could sort of shadow you as you go through what you're doing, but I just want to learn more on how to do what we're supposed to be doing. That's all. But I'll help as I can.
Okay, that sounds wonderful. Well, I will start on that one, and maybe even if I can get going on that and get some backing on that as well, or you know, email it out as I get some ideas and you know, get feedback as we go along would help.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Sort of maybe get people involved that way with opinions or thoughts.
Okay. But again, definitely we'll need the help in the finding the research. So if you on either of these, or if you're able to bring that up and kind of help provide that, would be very helpful.
I have a suggestion for just a phrase that could be incorporated perhaps into both of these.
Mm-hmm.
That would be prevention. I don't know how to start it, but somewhere in the middle of the whole sentence is going to say prevention of adverse health effects associated with high risk use. I'm going to write that in.
Very well said.
You like it?
Yes. I like that.
Adverse health, not just oral health effects, but all, because it's all connected, right?
It's all
adverse
connected.
health effects associated with high risk use.
Sounds wonderful.
Yes.
Perfect. So what does everybody's next Monday night look like? Is it pretty busy, or is it pretty open? Actually, mine is not. I'm going to be driving back into town. Should we table it to the 22nd? Maybe kind of mull on things as after the big meeting on Sunday night, and then via email if there's any concerns.
That sounds good.
Okay. Let's plan on the 22nd, and we'll go from there.
22nd.
Wonderful. So I will change that to read the 22nd. And thank you, everybody. I appreciate all the input. I will let you go for the evening.
Awesome.
So have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you so much, everybody, for doing this.
Thank you.
Okay.